penalize people that are already struggling to keep their houses warm and to cook their food with the energy from electricity. And then, of course, there's lots of natural sources that we have that are near impossible to control, such as things, wind-blown dust from natural sources and biomass burning. Air pollution has also become a high-stakes game. If you follow the media, you'll see that air pollution is been in the newspapers a lot. Claims that South Africa has the worst and deadliest air quality in the world. And then on the other hand, if we list the top 100 cities in the world, most polluted cities in the world, we don't even feature in those cities. And so it's critical for us to have a science-based approach to managing air quality, and so that when we do read articles in the newspapers, we can have a context of the facts that are being presented in those articles. Now, of course, increasingly we're understanding that air pollution is a critical component of people's health. And recent studies by Lelyveld, for example, in a publication, in Nature publication, shows that around the world, including in South Africa, there are premature deaths that are occurring as a result of, for example, small particles that are in the atmosphere that we breathe and we breathe into our lungs that cause all kinds of health issues. And currently they estimate that there's about 1.5 deaths per year in South Africa that occurred in 2010, and that number, 1,500 deaths that occur in South Africa as a result of air pollution prematurely. It's not a bullet. We don't kill people like we do with a gun, but over time it makes people die earlier than they might have died in a clean environment, and that is due to grow to numbers around 8,500 deaths prematurely per year if we don't control air quality. And of course, there's a whole range of air pollution sources, which I'll show you in the upcoming slides. Now, I mean, it's no secret that South Africa has an air pollution problem. So we're probably not the worst polluted place in the world, but we certainly are polluted. And I mean, we can see this from satellite. This is satellite images showing the most polluted areas of South Africa on average. And it doesn't matter whether we use old satellite data or we use new satellite data like the Sentinel-5 satellite, which was sent up by the European community. We can see that South Africa is a hotspot of pollution. And with the new satellites, we can identify individual sources and track their plumes individually until the point where they become this agglomerated mix of polluted air. And so we do need to worry about our air pollution and start to control it. If we look at the ground-based level concentrations, however, we can see that the places that are got the highest pollution, this is particles that are coarse particles that get caught up in our nose. These are the ones that we breathe deep into our lungs. And this map is a map of the Johannesburg area. Now you can see that this highest concentration of pollutants here is pollutants that are associated with areas that are linked to domestic burning. And the fine particles, also domestic burning, is a critical component. These are sites that basically are linked to industry. And you can say that although the concentrations are almost as high as the domestic burning, you can see that just controlling industry would not resolve our air pollution problem. We need to think of other sources. So what are how bad is the air pollution in South Africa? Well, I've given you two sites here. This is Kliprivier in the Vaal Triangle. This is Three Rivers near Sharpeville. And you can see I've just highlighted the small particles that we breathe into our lungs. And we have currently in Kliprivier over almost 600 exceedances of ambient air quality standard. I mean, that's an unacceptable number. What we're allowed is around 20. We have almost 600. At Three Rivers, we basically have near to 200 of the daily average. If we look at the annual means, we basically exceed the annual mean almost every year in these areas. So air quality in these low-income areas, as well as Three Rivers, which is a historically affluent area, basically air pollution is a problem. And we've measured indoors at people's houses, and you can see that Indoors, the concentrations are even higher, right? So this is households that burn wood or coal for their energy use. And you can see that concentrations reaching in the night times up to 300 micrograms per cubic meter, very high concentrations relative to the ambient standard. And even in houses that don't burn solid fuel in these townships, basically we have concentrations which are far exceed the ambient air quality standard. So both in the ambient environment, in other words, outside, and in the indoor environment, we have problems that we need to resolve. So how do we figure out how to resolve this problem? Well, we do source apportionment study. That's basically, we take samples, we look at the chemistry, and we try to decide which sources are contributing the most. And we've done this at many sites around South Africa now, and Simon will show you some of the results from Sharpeville specifically. But you can see that the things that are coming out of this are clearly residential burning, dust. I mean, obviously power stations are a critical component, and waste burning, which is one of the focuses of today's webinar. We know what the major sources are. We know what the main emissions are from the big power stations and the big industrial sources. And here you can see where they've been summarized. And you can see that the electricity generation for SOx, NOx, and PM10 are really high from electricity generation and from industry. From domestic burning, for example, it seems like a much lower contribution. But this is the emissions that we're measuring in the low-income townships need to be controlled, which is where people are breathing the air. So that's the challenge that South Africa has. So we need to take into account other sources, sources such as unpaved roads, motor vehicles, burning of waste, as you can see in these pictures, and also biomass burning. So my take-home message in this very short presentation is South Africa, like many developing countries, has air pollution problems. Of course, large industries are a significant contributor to the emissions, but we need to be also managing and controlling sources where people are breathing the air at low levels, and that's a much more complicated problem. Low-level emissions from residential combustion, waste burning, unpaved roads, lead to high levels of exposure to air pollution. We need to understand the drivers in the community, in order that we don't waste money, huge amounts of money, sort of, big percentages of our gross domestic product onto interventions that are going to have a very low impact on people's health. We don't have the money to do both. We need to, at this moment, prioritize. Much more work needs to be done to look at the drivers and also to make sure that we target the right emissions to get the best results from a health impact point of view. So at this stage, I'm going to hand over to Simon, who will give you a perspective on air pollution in Sharpeville.
Thank you very much, Professor Piketh. So Professor Piketh has given us an overview context of how the air quality in South Africa stands right now. But my talk will specifically focus on the problem of air pollution, specifically in a township called Sharpeville, where I come from. So the first question that I often get is, what do I think when I hear the word township, Sharpeville Township? As a resident of Sharpeville, when I think of my community, this is the picture that comes to my mind. What you see in the screen is one of the epic soccer events called the annual Mahatmasha tournament. Before the COVID pandemic, this event used to be held every year during the school holidays of the winter season at Sharpeville. During the Mahatmasha tournament, the soccer fans from different townships, including Everton, Sebokeng, Orange Farm, and Soweto, would come in numbers at the James and Pepsi grounds to support the soccer teams of their respective communities. For the community of Sharpeville, this used to be the time of the year when the spirit of Ubuntu was at the highest, as the people would reconcile their differences and unite and share the common aspiration, which is to win the tournament. Sharpeville is a low-income settlement located in the Vaal Triangle Airshed priority area, and it is positioned between two towns, namely Van der Bijl Park and Vereeniging. It falls within the influent local municipality and has a total population of 37,599 people. Despite Sharpeville being a vibrant township, my community is faced with serious environmental problems. One of them being high concentration of particulate matter. We now know that the average 24 hours PM2.5 concentration in Sharpeville is frequently beyond the 24-hour national ambient air quality standard of 40 microgram per cubic meter, almost throughout the year. However, Professor Piketh, Professor Roelof, and myself were quite interested in figuring out what are the contribution of different sources to particulate concentration in Sharpeville. We therefore conducted a study that was aimed at estimating the contributions of different sources to particulate matter concentration, particularly during the winter period. To achieve this, we sampled particulate matter on filters in Sharpeville during the period of winter and analyzed these filters to determine the contributions of different sources to particulate pollution in my community. And this is what we found. Important sources that contribute to PM2.5 concentration in my hometown, as shown in the pie chart on the left, are industries, coal combustion, domestic, and waste burning. For larger particles, which are PM10, as shown by the pie chart on the right, dust particles and traffic emissions are also important. It is evident by evaluating these pie charts that waste burning, it is the second highest contributing source of the larger particles, which are called PM10 after dust. So now the question becomes, is there something that we as the community of Sharpeville do to resolve the issue of waste burning, open waste burning in Sharpeville? The answer to that question is yes. For the past years, we have had community-driven projects in Sharpeville which were specifically focused on transforming informal dumping sites into recreational parks. The initiative came about as a result of residents being not happy about the dumping sites that were being formulated close to their houses. The picture you see on the left is how the Gauteng, one of the sections in Sharpeville, looked like before this initiative started. And on the right, on the right hand, what you see is how the Gauteng currently looks like as I speak. It took the community 4 months to transform informal dumping site in the Gauteng into a recreational park. It is evident that taking ownership of our township slowly bears fruits and brings the change that we want to see in our community. However, due to lack of resources and support, this initiative fails to keep up with the number of informal sites in Sharpeville as they rapidly keeps on increasing. Then the question becomes, based on the sources that we have identified in the social apportionment study that we've conducted, what should be done to resolve the problem of particulate pollution in Sharpeville? Well, we think people must be provided with basic service delivery, such as effective and efficient waste collection services, proper infrastructure, for example, paved roads, affordable clean energy, jobs so that they can refrain from using dirty solid fuels. And we also think that industries should also be controlled. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your time and for allowing me to share my inputs on how our community is struggling and trying to solve the issue of waste burning. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon and Stuart. I've neglected to say that Simon is also the star in an upcoming air quality documentary that we'll be releasing tomorrow, but I'll tell you more about that in a while. So next we have Dr. Claudine Ruiz and her team. She's going to be bringing the topic of air quality and waste much more closer together. She is the chair of the Environmental Management Program at the Northwest University. She has the unenviable distinction of supervising the most graduate students in the Faculty of Natural and Agricultural Science. She's also a mum and a very busy lady. She has a keen sense of humor, which I guess you need if you are supervising so many students. With her, she's got Mr. Ofentse Rabaji. He completed his master's degree in environmental management under her on this topic. He is also part of the NCPC-SA national program that focuses on capacitating young science and engineering students, which is very applicable to the event today. We are happy that you're here, Ofentse. And then lastly, Ms. Aneska Richter, who completed her honours degree with a focus on waste and air quality last year. She's currently a very capable intern with us at the Northwest University. She will talk about her own research in her honours year, and hopefully she will finish her MSc on the same topic next year. Over to Claudine and her team.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, Roelof, for introducing us as well. Our presentation will provide a brief overview of the current state of waste generation globally and in South Africa, also focusing on the link, like Simon explained, between waste management and consequences on air quality. And lastly, Ofentse and Aneska will present the findings of their research. So, despite various efforts to avoid and reduce waste generation, most waste-related research predicts that waste generation will significantly continue to increase over the next 50 to 100 years, especially in the developing world. The Global Waste Management Outlook by UNEP states that waste generation will rapidly continue to grow due to population growth, urbanization, and developing economies. The report predicts that waste generation may stabilize in the developed countries, but projects that the generation of waste will increase in the developing countries. The World Bank Group also forecasts a significant increase in waste generation and expect that the world will produce an average of 3.4 billion tons of waste per year by 2050. Now, focusing more specifically on the African context, the Global Environment Outlook 6 Regional Assessment Report for Africa highlights that poor waste management practices are one of the largest contributors to pollution and land degradation. The report further emphasizes the adverse impacts that the uncontrolled burning of waste may have on air quality. The African Waste Management Outlook similarly reports that waste management in Africa is largely characterized by uncontrolled dumping, open burning, and limited cases of landfill diversion and proper landfill disposal. In the South Africa State of Waste report, the Department of Environmental Affairs highlighted issues related to weak law enforcement, weak governance, low public awareness, and generally negative attitudes towards waste management, insufficient budgetary provisions by local government, and also waste service backlogs, often leading to illegal dumping and also the associated burning of waste. The management or the mismanagement of waste has the potential to cause adverse health effects and pollution of the environment. For the purposes of this presentation, we will focus on the possible consequences of waste management on air quality. So Simon has already, and Prof. Stuart already alluded to some of the impacts, especially waste burning and the impact on air quality. But some examples of how waste or waste management activities may impact on air quality include the decomposition of waste, in landfill sites, causing the generation of methane gas, the controlled incineration of hazardous and healthcare risk waste, or the co-processing of waste, for instance, waste being co-processed with coal in cement kilns, for example. But these are usually regulated through the National Environmental Management Air Quality Act's emission standards by means of atmospheric emissions licensing. The uncontrolled burning of waste is, however, a massive cause for concern, since it is usually unlawful and therefore cannot be regulated. Examples of uncontrolled waste burning may include the burning of waste by informal waste pickers to get access to certain materials. For instance, the burning of waste tires to get access to the wire inside of the tires, or even the burning of electronic waste to get access to some of the e-waste components. Poor service delivery may also cause backyard burning, or the illegal open dumping and associated burning of waste, usually to reduce the volumes of waste, or as quoted, to get rid of the waste. But as we know, the laws of energy conservation says that nothing gets destroyed, only converted from one form of energy to another. So therefore, the consequences of waste burning may include various emissions, such as carbon dioxide, particulate matter, dioxins, furans, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and also unintentional formation of PCBs, dependent on the composition of the waste. Some waste-related activities may also contribute to the emission of greenhouse gases or short-lived climate pollutants such as methane, black carbon, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide, as illustrated in this figure over here. So next, I will hand over to two of our students, Ofentse and Aneska from the Northwest University, who both recently researched the potential consequences of waste burning on air quality. Their research aimed at determining the consequences of the burning of waste, specifically focusing on waste composition on air quality. And their research involved the identification and description of dumping sites in their respective case study area, in this case, Sharpeville and Wedela, where they did a description of the location, the size, the evidence of waste burning at these dumping sites. They also did a waste composition characterization, where they looked at the quantities of the different waste streams being dumped, the quantities and the composition of, for instance, paper, plastics, glass, food waste, organics, metals, and other. And then based on the composition, they did an estimation of the potential contribution that the waste burning may have on air pollution, also using emission calculations. So I'm now going to hand over to Ofentse, who will present the findings of his research. Thank you. Ofentse, you are still muted. Sorry for interrupting.
Sorry about that. I'd just like to take this opportunity to say thank you to you, Dr. Roos, and Prof. Roelof, for honoring me with this opportunity to come speak about my research, particularly in this very important week of everything science. Yes, my research actually focused on the potential impact of waste burning on air quality. Claudine, you can go to the next slide, Claudine. All right, so my research was actually based in Sharpeville, as Simon has also mentioned, because his research was also based on Sharpeville. So Sharpeville is actually in the Vaal Triangle, in the Mfulweni local municipality. So it's a township in the southern of Gauteng, which has a population of about 38,000. That's according to Census 2011. It is located in the Vaal Triangle, which is comprised of Vereeniging van der Bijlpark and Sasolburg. So this area actually has several land use activities And among others, the primary ones are industrial activities, mining, commercial, agriculture, and obviously residential. So this place is actually known as this area is actually known as an air pollution hotspot. That is because that is due to the industrial activities that's taking place within this area that actually contribute towards the deterioration of the air quality, rather contributes to air pollution, that is. So it really experiences a complex air quality issues, and that's based on Scourge and others in 2003. And like I've mentioned with regards to the land use activities, the sources of emissions include the industrial and commercial activities, waste treatment and disposal, domestic burning of waste, transportation system, mining activities, and obviously malicious activities of burning objects such as tires. This is an image that actually just shows, this slide here shows, provides a brief background of the VAL triangle. This is actually what you would be confronted with if you would, when approaching the VAL. You would actually see a lot of smoke in the air coming. These are emissions coming from industrial and other land use activities. Oh, okay. All right. This slide shows these are actually the sites within the Sharpeville. As I've said, we have in my study we have identified 33 sites. These sites were identified randomly. These sites were assessed visually. This is where we actually identified the burning of waste and the mismanagement of waste. And we realized that this actually took place because due to minimal services of waste management services. So people would actually resort to just piling up waste wherever they find a place that's unoccupied. And as soon as it piles up, they would also resort to burning it. And that would actually lead to emissions that rather the production of pollutants that would be emitted into the air. So basically, when we started with the site characterization, we had identified 33 waste dumping sites. These were scattered throughout Sharpeville. They were randomly chosen. And then the biggest site, which we had identified was 1.6 kilometers squared. This was actually very big. It was along the Peter Andries Boulevard. So this is the site that we actually used to make our characterization. So with regards to waste composition, 20 sites, or rather the result of the composition, 20 sites comprised of a significant amount of plastics. And it was mostly film plastic, because I remember there were times where we were actually in the field and we actually saw people collecting the solid plastics, that's your bottles, among other things. And then 11 sites comprised of a significant amounts of other waste. These refers to tires, polystyrene, and nappies, and also other stuff. And then there was also organic waste. So basically, we actually used an app called Moletsane, which is used for data collection. So we went throughout Sharpeville, and then we identified places alongside these 33 sites where we actually would see if active waste burning was taking place, or if there was evidence of burning taking place. And then 3 out of the 33 sites, we actually witnessed active burning of waste. We actually saw people burning waste, which is actually very wrong. And then 16 of the sites, we actually saw evidence of waste burning. So what I mean by that is that we actually saw ashes and so forth. So basically, because we have seen that due to the waste composition that we have done, we saw that the waste was actually comprised of mainly plastic, tires, polystyrene, nappies, and organic waste. So basically, as I've said, my research was to determine the potential impact of waste burning in the air quality. So we've seen that with regards to plastic, we know that any plastic that is burned, it will produce dioxins and toxic substances. So basically, plastic, the reason why plastic is very, it's very dangerous when burned. It's actually the chemicals that were used to make the plastics. So now when burning it, it end up emitting pollutants into the air that contributes to the deterioration of the air quality. And then there was also waste such as tires and polystyrene. And then we also know that polystyrene is also dangerous, especially when it's been burnt. And we know that it produces gases such as carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide. And then there was also the burning of organic waste. And then we also know that some of the waste also it ends up decomposing. But I see time is actually not on my side. Can we please move to the next? All right, yes. So now with conclusion, in conclusion, we know that these people end up resorting to this mismanagement of waste due to lack of waste collection services. So, and then also, I believe that most of them, they also resort to such activities due to minimal knowledge and unawareness of certain environmental issues. And yes, so basically that is it, and that's what my research was actually based on, just to identify the potential impacts that waste burning could have on air quality. So I'll give, yes, I'll just leave it for Aneska now. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ofentse. Okay, so my study was the contribution of informal waste burning in Wedela to ambient particulate matter. So as Dr. Claudine explained in above section, there is an issue with weak governments resulting into communities finding alternative ways to dispose of it, which leads to informal waste burning and dumping. So previous air quality studies conducted in Wedela, which is a township in the Gauteng province near Carletonville, were used to identify informal waste dumping sites. So Wedela was chosen because there's a lack of and a shortage of waste collection services, and it is located on the periphery of the Full Triangle Airshed priority area. So most of the households work on the Carletonville mines that is located right next to the settlement, and dominated sources that contribute to air quality in Wedela is mostly windblown dust from the mines and then a small amount of traffic emissions from the national road, among other sources. So the waste samples were divided into categories as suggested by the ASTM, and 3 samples were taken from 3 different sites to represent the entire area. So site 1 was dominated by plastic foam that was composed of 2.2 kilograms and paper and cardboard. Now it had a low amount of dense plastic and metal. This can be due because we observed waste pickers actually collecting plastic and metal and glass for recycling. Site 2 was the biggest sample site, and it was located next to a road. And the dominating composition was organic waste that excluded food and plastic foam, which consists out of 40% of that waste sample. The 3rd site was located next to the primary school and was mostly dominated by food waste, which was 2.1 kilograms. But what was interesting is that the plastic foam was 700 grams, which was the lowest of all the sampled waste. So if we assumed that the sampled waste burned using a combustible percentage, the estimated amount of emissions can be determined. So as the formula stated, the E sample is the estimated particulate matter emissions released when the waste sample is burned hypothetically. The WT sample is the waste sample of all the sites in the different categories. And the C frac is the combustible percentage. And then the EF is the emission factor for the PM particulate gas. So PM 2.5 was 11.9 grams and PM 10 was 9.8 grams. So the plastic film and the dense plastic were combined to calculate the total plastic emissions. So if all the plastic were burned, which was 6.7 kilograms, only 2.3 kilograms were burned. The plastic was the largest waste fraction of the waste composition and had the highest percentage combustibility. The combination of all plastic should increase the amount of emissions released in the area. So this contribution of plastic waste and what it has to air quality in Wedela should be relatively high, while metal and glass take longer time to burn or need to burn under extreme temperatures, which result into a lower contribution. So the degree to which waste dumping and waste burning may contribute to PM emissions in Wedela was investigated. The waste collection services being a problem in Wedela in the community resulted into it being dumped alongside the road. The waste of all the waste samples primarily exists out of all plastic and polystyrene, which was more than 25%. So the PM emissions of burnt waste can differ depending on the composition of waste generated in the area. So it's important to have a better understanding of the waste composition in a South African context. And this gives us a clear idea of how to link waste composition and air quality to improve the waste management and then ultimately improve air quality. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudine, Ofentse, and Aneska for those interesting presentations. I'm sure there might be some of the municipal authority on this webinar. And if you think that we are throwing you under the bus, it would be good for us all to remember that the urban growth rates we are experiencing in Africa are the highest in the world, right? So in some time in the last decade, South Africa reached 3.5%, which means that we are doubling the sizes of cities every 20 to 30 years. In some parts of Africa at the moment, it's closer to 10, 15 years. So this problem that we're talking about is very relevant for South Africa, and it's going to become even more relevant for the rest of Africa. So it's good that we have an expert about this in our midst. Prof. Linda Godfrey is a principal scientist at the CSIR and an extraordinary professor at the Northwest University. She has a PhD in engineering and more than 20 years of experience on today's topic. She's a well-published author, and we are very happy to have stolen some of her time for today's webinar. Over to you, Prof. Linda.
Thank you very much, Roelof. Let me just see if I can share my screen. If you can just stop on your side, and then I'll... Perfect, thanks. There we go. Great, thank you. So I think it's great having gone last in the session today, because I think what I'd like to touch on really just, I think, reinforces some of the, see, for some reason it says my screen sharing is paused. I'm not sure why. So if there are any problems, great. If there are any problems with the slides changing, just let me know. So I think basically just to reinforce some of the really important messages that have come out from the session this morning. I think first of all, just to highlight this point, Roelof, you spoke about, that municipalities, I think, are feeling a lot of the strain with regards to the management of waste. And sometimes I think it can be incredibly overwhelming in terms of all of the issues that they need to deal with, from illegal dumping and littering to the disposal of hazardous waste, the leakage of waste into the environment. We're seeing open burning of waste, the informal collection, the loss of a lot of recyclable waste to our landfills, and then the state of our landfill sites as well. And certainly in terms of today's topic, in the media over the last year, sort of year and a half, we've seen a number of sites where we've experienced open burning, whether it's been intentionally set alight, or accidental, in terms of during winter, very often informal reclaimers start fires to keep warm, and very often it spreads. And so there are a whole host of reasons as to why we are seeing the open burning of waste. But certainly it's been picked up in the headlines of a number of newspapers and media outlets over the last year and a bit. And this is not just an issue facing South Africa. We've seen this in the broader SADC region as well, up into Africa, and certainly across most developing countries. The issue of open burning is really an issue that plagues the waste sector. So what does the waste sector look like in South Africa? We've seen some of the figures from the presentations before this. I'm not going to repeat all of these numbers, but really just to highlight a few key points. I think the first one is if you look at our general waste streams, some of the big waste streams that dominate our waste sector is really firstly organic waste, and we've seen this touched on in some of the earlier presentations, ash and slag, construction and demolition waste. And I think the important thing to stress here is that while certainly we've made progress in terms of...
Linda, your slides are actually stuck. So we only seen your first slide.
Well, this is most odd.
Now ask Hina maybe to get to share your slides.
No, let me try again.
We've seen your, not your presenting slide, that's right.
All right, better now?
South Africa is faced with many waste management challenges. That's what we see.
Perfect. So as I was saying, if you look at the waste streams that dominate our landscape, it's the organic waste that's been spoken about. And while we are making progress in terms of the diversion of waste away from landfill sites, with the latest state of waste report suggesting that we're only sending around 65% of our general waste to landfill, and certainly there are some question marks around that. The important thing to realize is that technology solutions already exist to divert most of these waste streams into beneficiation opportunities. And so one of the questions becomes, well, why are we not doing that? Despite having embedded in our waste policy for probably the last 2 decades, the waste hierarchy, which is focusing on the diversion of waste away from landfilling towards prevention, reuse, recycling, and recovery. Landfilling, and I use that term in inverted commas because in most instances, as you can see in the slide, it really is uncontrolled or controlled dumping. And so this landfilling still remains our dominant technology solution in managing waste in South Africa. One of the big problems as well is that we're also seeing significant quantities of waste actually escaping our formal waste collection system, as we've seen in some of the previous presentations as well. And again, a way of managing this waste when it's dumped within communities is to set it alight. And again, we've seen the impacts of that in terms of open burning of waste. In fact, according to the most recent general household survey published by Statistics South Africa, only 61% of South African households actually have a regular municipal waste collection service. And they state in the report that that's the lowest that's been in more than a decade. So in fact, our waste collection services are actually deteriorating within the country. And I know, many of our municipalities are really struggling in terms of providing the service, which ultimately, is a constitutional right in terms of the South African Constitution. So if landfilling remains a dominant technology choice, if our landfill sites are in fact mostly controlled or controlled dump sites, we can obviously experience a lot of environmental impacts associated with this. In terms of, the fact that we don't have daily compaction and cover of our waste leads to issues around windblown litter, for example. The fact that we're not necessarily always managing our water associated with these dump sites then impacts upon, groundwater, upon surface water quality, the infiltration of rainwater, the generation of leachate, etc. The fact that we're still dumping so much organic waste, things like food waste and garden waste, to these disposal sites. The breakdown of this waste, produces various gases which contribute to South Africa's greenhouse gas profile. And in fact, most consistently across our greenhouse gas emission inventories, and certainly the latest one, which I think is the 7th one, it shows that the waste sector is the 2nd largest contributor in terms of methane generation to the country's profile. So again, the practice of disposing of these waste streams to our disposal sites is having significant air quality impacts. I've spoken about this issue around the uncontrolled and open burning of waste, and we've seen from previous presentations what that means in terms of air quality impacts and associated health impacts, very often this taking place in close proximity to our communities. And then the fact that we're in fact losing a large quantity of recyclables to these dump sites, thankfully, collected by our informal waste sector, who for them, they're earning a livelihood from the collection of these materials, but still the loss of resources to our disposal sites. So, we've seen a lot in terms of the impacts of poor waste management in terms of air quality and open burning. But what should South Africa's strategy be in terms of moving forward and addressing these big challenges? And I think here we can take guidance from the African Waste Management Outlook, which really focuses on two aspects. The first aspect says we have to bring waste under control. And while we are doing that, we can essentially harness this opportunity of waste as resource. So this first one, bringing waste under control, what do we mean by that? You know, the one thing that I cannot stress enough is that really city cleansing and basic street cleaning, collection of waste is the foundation of every integrated waste management system. Before we even start talking about fancy things of recycling and waste to energy and all of those kinds of things, we have to get the basics right in terms of keeping our cities and our towns clean. And that means providing a regular waste collection service to all. The second thing is that once we've collected that waste needs to go to an appropriate engineered landfill site. So we have to phase out uncontrolled and controlled dump sites and move towards more regional sanitary engineered landfills. And in parallel to this point around harnessing the opportunity of waste as resource, it's really around this diversion of waste away from landfill and moving it up the hierarchy. We have to develop local end-use markets to be able to absorb these waste streams as resource. So if you look at organic waste, for example, the single largest general waste stream produced in South Africa, that could quite easily be diverted into composting, it could go into biogas recovery, or it could go into higher value product recovery. Our construction and demolition waste, our building waste, could go into alternative building material. There is a lot of opportunity for reuse and recycling of our paper and packaging waste, our plastic, our paper, metals, for example, and then refurbishment and repair of electronic waste. And the one thing that I always try to stress is that just diverting these three waste streams away from our landfill sites could theoretically divert anywhere between 60 to 70%, if not more, of our municipal waste away from landfill, which really leaves just sort of that last maybe 30%, which could then go to more engineered regional disposal sites. The other thing as well that I touched on before is, you know, the technology solutions already exist to deal with many of these waste streams. And, you know, South Africa is probably 20 to 30 years behind many developed countries when it comes to managing waste, so we can learn from them in terms of what works, but also important in terms of what doesn't work. And we could literally drop technologies into South Africa tomorrow to deal with these waste streams. Importantly, that they need to be appropriate technologies for South Africa, and probably some level of adaptation and localization. But the question is, which technologies? You know, should we be pursuing composting of organic waste, or should we be pursuing anaerobic digestion and biogas recovery? And I think this is one of the things that we're sort of figuring out, is what is an appropriate technology response for South Africa? Should we go the route of high temperature waste to energy thermal destruction, or should we in fact be driving more of a recycling economy and more of a circular economy? So I think in terms of, you know, the strategy that as a country we really need to adopt is, for me, I would say we need to look at a strategy of zero of those three waste streams to landfill: no organic waste, no construction and demolition waste unless it's processed and used as cover, and certainly no paper and packaging waste. The first two waste streams fall very much within the responsibility of local government. For paper and packaging, we now thankfully have extended producer responsibility as a policy instrument. And so the responsibility now starts to fall onto producers and onto industry to deal with this waste stream. We have to have strict enforcement on the operation and management of all of our landfill sites, whether public or private. This will lead to significant increases in costs of landfilling, which we must see if alternative waste treatment technologies are going to become economically viable. And then thirdly, is we really do need an enabling environment. We need the right policy instruments, the right economic instruments, incentives, for example, to drive this kind of strategy. And very importantly, the role of public-private partnerships and the private sector in terms of unlocking these growth opportunities. And I believe that through these three steps, we can essentially, you know, push this waste away from landfill site. We can divert it to alternative waste treatment technologies. This leaves that last 30% or so of waste to go to these regional engineered landfill sites. And all of this really creates opportunity for us to generate new jobs and new livelihoods within the South African waste sector. There certainly are, you know, still some, I think, some research questions and some evidence needs in terms of being able to support this strategy. What would a strategy like this cost for South Africa? What are the right policy instruments that we need to put in place to create this enabling environment? And really, what should this technology portfolio look like in terms of balancing it out in terms of some of the the big trade-offs around greenhouse gas emissions, around job creation, about resource recovery and resource use, etc. And so with that, really, just to stress is that I think there is a workable solution that we can actually implement in South Africa to address these big issues around open burning, around the emissions that we're seeing from the waste that is being disposed to landfill. It's really just a case of, having the right political will, having the right mechanisms in place, both in local government and within the private sector to drive these. But certainly, I think we're on the right path, but there's still a lot more that needs to be done in terms of addressing our waste problem. Thank you very much, Roelof.
Thank you, Linda, for a great talk. There's a little bit of time left for some questions. Maybe let's first go to Stuart. There's a question around climate. Can you maybe talk about what this link is between waste burning, emissions, and climate?
Is that posed to me, Roelof?
To Stuart.
Yeah, thanks, Roelof. So, I mean, the main link between burning of any kind and climate is that, of course, if we burn, ultimately we release significant amounts of greenhouse gases. So whether you're burning coal in a power station, which of course is, the power industry is by far the biggest emitter of greenhouse gases in our country and on the continent, actually. But if you burn anything, effectively, ultimately, you're releasing greenhouse gases. At the same time, while you're releasing those greenhouse gases, of course, you're also emitting pollutants, criteria pollutants, such as SO2, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and particulate matter, which, of course, all have health implications. And so the big challenge is to be able to find ways of managing the burning, the emissions, and finding sources where we can derive the highest co-benefits of managing both the emissions of greenhouse gases to reduce burning, as well as reducing the emissions of criteria pollutants, such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and particulate matter. So the real link between burning of any kind and the climate is, of course, the emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which are an anthropogenic force of the climate.
Thank you for that. Then maybe a question for Aneska and Ofentse. There were some people who were talking about how important it is to be getting a grip on what the percentage of waste is that actually can burn and that can lead to these emissions that Stuart's talking about. One of the two of you, do you want to maybe expand on how you went about to do this in your research, and what do you think you can do? What did you learn from those methods? And unmute yourself, Aneska.
Sorry. So I used literature about other studies that figured out how to use what type what amount of waste is burned. But questionnaires is one of the options. So you can use questionnaires in communities to ask them, how much of the waste are you dumping, and how much of that do the community or do the households burn itself? That's one option I can think of. I don't know if Ofentse has another view on it.
Ofentse, tell us about how you got your hands dirty. Maybe explain to us how you actually went and checked what was the waste composition.
All right. Thank you so much, Prof. Roelof. So basically, what we did was we went site by site and then we literally went and assessed the waste. So, but most of the places that we had identified were on the outskirts. Like I had said, the biggest one was along Andries Pieter Boulevard. So we basically went into the waste, and then we would identify a certain portion of the area and then assess it visually. And then we would actually also see what waste was actually burned, because most of the organic waste would take long so to dry up. So most of it would literally burn half and then just be there and then end up decomposing. But most of the evidence that we actually saw was the burning of plastic, because when plastic is burned, you can actually see it there. And then and also things like paper and also tins and so forth. Those are the ones that we could actually see, that this is the type of waste that was burned according to the evidence that was captured at the site. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ofentse, and I must say I enjoyed your background, kids and kid noises. I'm assuming you're busy at school there, so that's in the spirit of National Science Week. Last question maybe for Linda, two-pronged question. The first one is maybe, can you expand on the role of waste pickers? I remember reading that they actually make a significant contribution to recycling in South Africa. And the second one that you can also touch on is funding for municipalities. Do we have enough money going to this function?
Great, thanks, Roelof. Yeah, absolutely. Our informal waste sector is a critical bridge between our service chain and our value chain in South Africa. Research that we did a couple of years ago suggested that they were responsible for diverting around 80 to 90% of our paper and packaging waste into the recycling economy. More recent research suggests that that is a bit lower now, that we're starting to see some formal sector erosion into the role that they are playing, which obviously does impact upon their livelihoods and their income. And so, it's something that we need to be very sensitive to around protecting these livelihoods. It's not just an issue of just saying, well, let's formalize the informal waste sector. We know that that does not work. And so the Department of Science and Innovation actually funded the development of guidelines for integration of the informal sector, that we can actually work together with municipalities to actually look at solutions, at workable solutions to better integrate the informal sector into the waste economy. And we could spend a whole session just talking about that. The second point that you spoke about was around the funding to do this. And this is a tricky one because, very often when we speak to municipalities, they say, we just don't have the money to implement this kind of simple strategy just around, basic waste collection service delivery. I always tend to push back on that, and that if you look at National Treasury figures, the last I saw, it was about 11 billion rand that was allocated from National Treasury to local government in South Africa for waste services. And so the question is, are we using the 11 billion rand effectively? Is it really that we don't have enough money, or is it around how we're using that funding? I know certainly for some municipalities it is an issue, especially where there's a very high indigent population, which is not able to pay for services. And then I think another issue which we see more and more emerging in South Africa is we see this decline in willingness to pay for services, this kind of erosion of the tax base. And that is a very real concern, because once you start to have breakdown in trust, of citizens living in a city, and we start to have breakdown in trust in willingness to pay for services, it really starts to just spiral down from that. And once you have that kick in, it just becomes really, really difficult for a municipality to actually give effect to its constitutional responsibility. So I think it is a complex landscape. There are a number of things that we do need to look at and address in this. But I certainly think, we're starting off with at least with a healthy pool of funding being directed into waste management. But yes, there are other things we could be doing as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. I think it's a fairly positive note for us to finish on. I have to take this time to again thank the people that make this possible, the NRF, SASTA, the Northwest University, and NACA. We really appreciate those bodies and the people that helped behind the scenes to make this possible. And then a special word of thanks for the speakers, Prof. Stuart, Prof. Linda, Dr. Claudine, and our young people of the future, Simon, Ofentse, and Aneska. I ask that you guys would please review this webinar. It's important for SASTA that we do this. So this link is on the screen, and it will also be shared in the chat. So please will all of you go and review the session. And then the last point that I want to advertise is the air quality documentary that will be released tomorrow. There's the link. It's also on the National Science Week program. So tomorrow at 9. And you can look out for Simon Tsepo Moletsane, his debut as an actor, and I think he did a really great job. So we're excited about that. And you'll also see that waste plays an important role in the documentary. With that, thank you to everyone. As we said on the chat, this video will stay on YouTube. We will hopefully edit it a little bit and then also look at the NACA website under news, and you'll find all the latest information about this webinar. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.